In the Gospel of John, chapter 10, Jesus delivers one of the most heavily scrutinized declarations in biblical literature: "I and the Father are one." This illustrates the standard approach. The left model represents scholars reading this phrase as a disjointed leap into abstract ontology. The text is treated as a standalone metaphysical assertion about divine essence. It isolates the claim as a raw data point dropped from a vacuum. Reading the passage this way fractures its internal coherence. It requires ignoring the preceding verses and the historical conflict that generated the claim. Forcing an ontological framework onto John 10 obscures the text's actual governing issue: authority grounded entirely in prophetic testimony. The historical climax of the text arrives abruptly. Following Jesus' statement, his opponents immediately pick up stones to execute him. The ensuing dialogue reveals a strict paradox. The opponents explicitly acknowledge that Jesus' physical works, the miracles, are extraordinary. They do not deny the physical reality of the events. They even take it a step further, formally admitting that these miraculous works possess divine provenance. They concede the works originate from the Father. If the opponents admit the miracles are both real and divine in origin, why is the resulting legal charge blasphemy? The text shows a conflict that is completely detached from verifying the reality of the miracles. The opponents and Jesus are fighting over the system of meaning those miracles establish. Leading up to the conflict, Jesus makes a prerequisite claim: "My sheep hear my voice." He establishes a definition of what that voice is before he claims unity with the Father. A common error is to interpret hearing as an immediate mystical apprehension, or as a sign of heightened moral sensitivity among his followers. This diagram outlines the actual operative framework at play: the prophetic economy. God's voice here is strictly mediate, communicated through a sworn word spoken beforehand, traveling through history toward a predetermined point of resolution. When Jesus speaks in history, his voice perfectly phase matches the historical waveform of the Old Testament promise. The two distinct signals lock together to form a single continuous line. This precise phase matching process is covenantal recognition. Hearing the voice means acknowledging that the specific voice now speaking is the exact same voice that previously promised. The sheep are not individuals possessing superior spirituality. They are the individuals who accurately recognize the historical continuity between the promised word and the speaking word. The logic applied to Jesus' voice extends directly to his physical works. The miracles serve a highly specific mechanical purpose within this economy. This flowchart maps how the opponents process the data of the miracles. When the data enters the standalone power branch, they successfully accept it, entirely comfortable recognizing raw displays of divine power. The breakdown occurs when that same data attempts to enter the Messianic fulfillment branch. This is the exact concept the opponents flatly refuse to grant. Within the prophetic economy, these works function as foretold signs, designed strictly to identify the bearer as the promised one. When Jesus appeals to his works in the text, he is not retreating from his claims to offer secondary evidence. He is presenting scriptural proof. By refusing to accept the testimonial function of the miracles on prophetic grounds, the opponents force themselves into a fatal logical contradiction. They acknowledge divine power while vehemently denying divine authorization. Why embrace a logical contradiction instead of accepting the evidence in front of them? This structural model reveals the immense theological cost of admitting the works are actual prophetic fulfillment. The uninterrupted line represents the opponent's preferred posture, guaranteeing direct, unmediated access to God. To admit that the works are prophetic fulfillment is to activate governing revelation. The vertical line of direct access is severed, and mediation through the fulfillment node becomes mandatory. Accepting the works means admitting Jesus stands within and entirely completes the Old Testament witness. This admission establishes a new, mandatory governing revelation that replaces their existing systemic authority. They reject the works not because the evidence is insufficient, but to protect their systemic monopoly on accessing God. This structural threat explains the sudden formal charge of blasphemy. Blasphemy serves as a highly convenient legal tool. It allows the opponents to legally reject the conclusion without having to debate the undeniable miraculous evidence. Looking at this textual analysis graphic, we can see that the blasphemy accusation is not triggered by Jesus using isolated, grandiose language about God. The charge triggers exactly when Jesus binds his identity, his authority, and his works into a singular, indivisible claim. The oneness he asserts is a revelatory unity, a historical claim about testimony rather than a metaphysical abstraction. The Father who promised and the Son who fulfills operate an identical testimony, identical authority, and identical governing meaning over history. The blasphemy charge is the inevitable explosion resulting from two highly incompatible frameworks of revelation colliding in real time. This diagram shows how the phrase resolves. When Jesus states, "I and the Father are one," the prophetic words spoken and embodied merge. This remains a claim to deity, but one inextricably bound to historical revelation, not isolated metaphysics. The Father and the Son are not two witnesses saying different things. They constitute a single, continuous self-testimony of God. Jesus is God precisely because he is the faithful, embodied fulfillment of the Father's sworn word. This brings us back to the lethal threat in the dirt. Rejecting Jesus constitutes a rejection of the prophetic testimony making God known. The conflict does not escalate to violence due to confusion or ambiguity in Jesus' teaching. His opponents understand the implications of the prophetic economy perfectly. The stones are lifted not because the claim to deity is unclear, but because within the prophetic economy it is unbearably clear.